everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I'm Erika Holst, and with us tonight is Vincent Chappelle, who goes by June to his friends. And June is the co-curator and subject of our newest installation to At Home in the Heartland. So I'm going to start off and just give you a little bit of background about this entire exhibit, and then we're going to dive into how the installation of this room took place. And I think I'm just going to do a private Q&A with June so we can kind of get the background and the deeper story on all the objects in here. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up. And if you have questions for us, we'd love to take them. So this is an exhibit called At Home in the Heartland. It's on the second floor of the Illinois State Museum's main facility. And this exhibit opened in 1991, which does mean that it is 30 years old at this point. When it was opened, this was a groundbreaking look into the domestic lives and consumer habits of Illinoisans. At the time, it was really kind of a cutting-edge approach to think about the ways that people lived and what kind of history taking place in the home, as opposed to sort of big, historical events, and thinking a lot about women's experience within the home. So that was great. 30 years on, the history field and the museum field have continued to evolve, and we are cognizant of some of the shortcomings of this exhibit. It is rather static, being behind glass, and also the subject matter tends to skew sort of a white middle class audience. It's become very apparent that it's missing the representation of the diverse voices that comprise the people of the state of Illinois. And so our installation of June's Room is the first and most important step in kind of turning the ship and broadening the story that we're telling and making it more inclusive, and hopefully something that new generations of kids will be able to relate to. So I want to bring June into the conversation here. And first of all, June, can I ask, this is an amazing peek into your childhood years. The room represents June's childhood bedroom from when he was growing up on the south side of Chicago in the early 2000s. And so, June, why did you agree to share your story with us, first of all?
Well, I mean, when I, a while back, I just remember noticing like the lack of a black, brown, or indigenous representation like in this particular exhibit. And I wanted to help do something about that. And when it was brought to my attention that this, was an idea that, I wanted to bring to fruition, I was, all for it, ready to help. And I'm very glad that, I could, serve as like a subject matter in a way, to help bring that representation to,
We're super grateful. Can you tell us just like who you were as a kid, like the June Chappelle that lived in this bedroom? Can you kind of set the scene for us? Like, where was your apartment? What was your family like? What were you like as a kid?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, it was on 77th and Greenwood, which is an area in Grand Cross. It's in the Grand Crossing area of Chicago, southeast side. I was really quiet, and I think that the reason I was so quiet and extremely like precocious as well, like I grew up in a family where there was never less than maybe 12 people in our house. Oh, so there was never less than maybe 12 people in our house at one point in time. By the time my dad passed away when I was about 14, maybe 15 years old, there were 16 of us in the house. And there was always so much noise and so much action. I guess I just, ended up being like super quiet because there was already so much going on. So yeah, I really never knew how to explain that. I just ended up being like a super quiet kid in like this really loud house.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That makes sense.
And
so what did your room mean to you in the midst of like a big kind of loud household?
It was a sanctuary for me. It was a sanctuary for me Um, that's not to say I never had to share it, but it wasn't very often that I had to share it. So I don't think because the house was like, it was a two flat, so there were like rooms like all throughout. And there were even relatives in the basement of the house. So I guess I got kind of lucky to have a room to myself at least like 75% of the time. Um, but it was a place where I could go and like find like something quiet, tranquility, sanctuary for me. I didn't always feel like I had a place, in the world around me, and sometimes even in my own family. So I was really reclusive as a kid for the most part. And it was almost a running joke. Like I actually had a few like older relatives or cousins used to call me the older. Because I never I never came out of my room. And there was reason for that. There were like other things that I dealt with, like trying to like find myself, like gaining comfort with who I was or who I am, like my sexuality, etc. Dealing with like other drama that teenagers or young people tend to deal with. Um, Even mental health, like depression or anxiety. So this was like a place where I could go, kind of close myself off a bit from that and just be to myself. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're so grateful that you helped to recreate this window. It's not just a window into your room, it's kind of a window into your life as a kid in the early 20th century. And so all the objects in the room are not your actual possessions. So you and I working together kind of scoured eBay and this and that and looked for, we came up with, you had mentioned this list of like powerful objects that meant something to you and had stories behind them. And then we went and bought them, which was fun.
It was really fun.
So looking at this, I feel like this is like you are looking into a child or teen's bedroom, but everything in here was like chosen with a purpose, right?
Absolutely.
Do you can you tell us about some of the things and like the stories behind them?
Yes, I think I'll actually start with the CDs that can be seen like right here in the background. I grew up in a very religious family. My mom, for the most part, was AME, and for those of you that may not be familiar, is African Methodist Episcopal. But eventually, she started going to a Pentecostal church, which was called Apostolic Faith Church on the south side of Chicago. And that was where she continued to go even after she married my dad. That was his family church, as a matter of fact. So my parents also had a gospel group. So I grew up like highly immersed in like the church, in gospel music. My family sang, or everybody sang or played an instrument. I never got the instrumental gene, but I did get the singing gene, at least from my mom. So that was, the church was like, it wasn't always my favorite place in the world, for like multiple reasons. But I can say that in a lot of ways, it is like very historically relevant. It's always been like a sanctuary and like a place where Black people could go to congregate, to get away from the world, to deal with things that may have ailed them in a way, due to society. So I can say that it did play a very important role in my life, even though I'm not exactly religious anymore. But even when it comes to like my singing talent, I wouldn't really have that if it wasn't for the church. That was literally my first music school before I even went away to college. So even now, gospel music is like still really important to me, even if not for like completely religious purposes. I just love to hear people who look like me sing, and the beauty that comes from that. And I'm really, really thankful that my parents, exposed me to like gospel music from like a very, very early age, because it's really important, particularly to Black culture.
That's awesome. And this is, I just love the conversation that we're having and the way that you're sharing your stories and how they're tied to an object. So, you know, one gospel CD on a shelf has such a like deep and rich story, not just to your life, but kind of in the context of, you know, like the Black experience in America. And I hope that people who are watching and people who come to this exhibit like realize that we're all that way, you know, our lives all have stories, and the objects that are meaningful to us all have stories attached to them that are kind of cool to dig into and think about why we have them and why they mean the things that they do.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about some of the reading that you did, like as a child and teenager?
Yes. I was always like really into books. Honestly, when it came to how reclusive I was, like most of the time, if I wasn't listening to music, I was reading. So about seventh grade, I discovered the works of like Toni Morrison, you know, Sula, Tar Baby, The Bluest Eye, and Sula's actually my favorite Toni Morrison book. And I also, you know, discovered people like Zora Neale Hurston. And I always had like a really, really, I always had like a really high interest in African American history, mainly due to it was an interest that was sparked by my dad when I was really young, and to see or like read literature that was fictional but also like still historically relevant made me all the more interested in African American history. So I didn't even realize that at that young age, like 12, 13, I was actually like reading on like a college level. And like some of my classmates were too, because eventually by like ninth grade, that was like required reading. And we didn't know. And that's one of the things that I look back on. Even maybe some of my classmates might look back on from the school that I went to on the south side of Chicago, might be really thankful for too, because we had no idea. It was just books that we just happened to take an interest in. You know, even though sometimes it was a little bit boring because it was required, but if you really like got into it, you know, you found a love for those particular books. And, you know, a point of relatability too, I think.
So here's something that identifies you as a 21st century child that I think kids will recognize, but it will look different to them. Can you tell us about your phone here and the role that it played in your life, when you got it, how you used it, who you talked to?
It's a Nokia flip phone, and it has a tiny antenna. I remember getting that phone when I was about 14-ish. I remember I kind of got made fun of for having a flip phone because I guess it was like a time when people, or at least a flip phone that looked like that, because other kids might have had like razors because that was like a thing, like the Motorola razor phone, or a phone that like slid up, or like a sidekick. But my mom was just like, "This is really inexpensive. This is what you get and deal with it." So that was my first cell phone. I talked to like a few friends, but I also want to bear in mind if there are like any young people out there listening. I had that phone during a time where your minutes were only free after a certain time during the day. So you would probably have to like call a friend and say, "Well, call me back after like 6 or 7 because my minutes aren't free right now." So that was a thing. And I'm sure that some of you adults out there can relate too. And I also like spent a lot of time like talking to boys on the phone. Got into a little trouble like talking to like a few people like very late at night. But yeah, I think my mom might have like called me a little fast. Just the humor in it, but you know, I was a teenager. But I'm also really thankful that my mom like accepted me for who I was. Like she's always been really accepting, and that was not something that a lot of people that I knew who were, you know, part of the LGBTQ community and like very young, especially when they came from religious families, they didn't really have that. So I was really fortunate and privileged in a way to like be from like this religious family where I'm being raised by like, you know, this baby boomer, you know, Southern lady, and she just accepted me and loved me for who I
the phone, where you had to text with the numbers?
Yeah, what was that called again? This-
Is it? I didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah, but I was a master at it though. I wouldn't even look at the phone. Complete sentences. Just like I was very skilled on that phone. Just like now, it would just be weird. So small.
So for those too young to remember, you used to have to, it was like push one once for A, one twice for B, one three
Yeah.
times for C, and you have to like type out all the letters like that. And this was a very like brief window of time. That was like the technological standard, but yeah.
And then like, we started to get like a taste of like touch screen phones, and then it just kind of took off from there. But yeah, that was a mobile device that I eventually broke on purpose. And then my mom got me another one and dared me to break it because I thought that I would get a different one, but that didn't happen. So that part, I don't even think I talked about that part.
No, I
No, I
didn't know
did
that
not.
one.
It just came back.
So can you tell us about the clear speech tapes that are in there?
Yes. For those of you, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you out there understand that, we as Black people, we have several ways of speaking. I grew up in a family of, I'm maybe first to second generation, Midwestern. So the dialects that my family spoke were still fairly prevalent. We picked up the accents, etc. And I remember having a few older relatives on my dad's side tell me that no one would ever take me seriously if they couldn't understand me. And in a way, I was a little offended, but as I grew older, I kind of understood why. Now, I'm at a point now where I don't feel the need to code switch all the time. And code switching is when you just switch up your speech depending on where you are or your comfort level. Because when I'm around, other Black people, I don't always talk the same. But I can say the speech tapes kind of provided me I wonder what do I call it? It provided it just provided a way for me to navigate different worlds outside of my own. And unfortunately, that's just something that we as Black people tend to have to do or it's a survival mechanism in a way. And it's something that we've always had to do, at least to a certain extent. But I'm very happy that now we're getting to a point where we're realizing that is not something that we always have to do. This is the way we talk. This is our language. This is who we are, and that we should be proud of it. The same thing goes for wearing our natural hair in the workplace.
Yeah, and speaking of that, a can of Murray's hair pomade in there.
Murray's.
And can you tell us the story between that and how your hair evolved as you were a teenager?
Yes. As a small kid, my mom would never let me get really low cuts. It was usually a fairly grown out, kind of a fro. And my dad always had a tendency. Now, granted, I just want to put out there that my dad was born in 1945, so it was a different time for him. He would always put this really, really deep part on one side of my head, and I always went to school looking like Frederick Douglass. I appreciate Frederick Douglass for who he was, do not get me wrong, but I didn't want to go to school looking like him. So, when I was about 11, I convinced my parents to let me get braids. And eventually my dad, maybe 3 years later, wanted me to get them cut. And I try to believe that everybody has really good intentions, and I think that my dad did. But he also didn't realize what texturism was or is. And he tended to have a bias, and a lot of other people that I grew up around tended to have a bias on coilier hair. If your hair was coily or kinkier, it wasn't exactly acceptable. But if you happen to have a loose curl pattern, that was more acceptable in society. And texturism is honestly, it's something that stems from like white supremacy, and it's something that many of us have had to deal with, some on a greater level, honestly. So he eventually made me cut my hair off, and then pomades like Murray's or like 360 style, and a wave brush became my best friend. So yeah. But yeah.
So you had mentioned a little earlier about your family being like first, second generation to Chicago. And part of what we dove into with this installation was your family background. We have a label over here that talks about your family, and there's an associated website where there's more information about your family and who they are and kind of the background story. Can you tell us about the Chappelles and how you wound up where you did in Chicago?
Yes. I'll just say like it all goes back to like how my interest for history was sparked, and like even genealogy, and it comes from my dad. I grew up, you know, in a home where my dad like still had access, or like still had a lot of like old photos, and that was like before scanning was a thing. And I remember being a kid and, you know, sneaking into like a trunk that he had, like taking photos out because I was so fascinated, and I'd never seen anything like that before. So he began to tell me bits and pieces about his family, and I eventually, you know, started to do digging of my own. Um, so they are originally from South Carolina, Greenwood, and Charleston, South Carolina. The Chappelles are. They eventually ended up in Evanston, Illinois, um, about 1920, so a little over 100 years ago. Um, and that's where they settled for a while before moving into the Bronzeville area on the south side. But the reason that they left the South is, you know, one, like many Black families have left the South due to like socioeconomic issues. Also, my great grandfather, you know, was a man who identified as Black, even though he didn't outwardly look it to everybody. He had the ability to pass, and he did do that in order to um, operate this business in certain areas in and outside of South Carolina. But eventually he was caught up, and a friend of someone he thought was a friend of his told one night, and they eventually got chased out of South Carolina due to that. So
Had you talked to a relative who actually remembers leaving? Like it was kind of a dramatic, like they literally like fled in the night, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's not even like the only instance in my entire family where someone had to leave in the middle of the night. Like there are like 3 different lines of my family that had to like leave at night, because that was like the safest way to get out of the areas that they were in.
So they were like landowners in South Carolina and basically had to like leave their land and their property and their generational wealth behind and like start over again in Chicago. So
my great grandfather, the property that they lived on into the 20s had been in our family since like the 1840s. And the land remained in the family, I think, for a while after that. But that particular line of the family that I stemmed from directly had to leave.
And then your family settled in, was it Evanston first?
Evanston first, and then eventually, not long after that, they were in the Bronzeville area. And that is also where eventually we born. Michael Lee's hospital. It no longer exists, but yeah.
So June, imagine, you know, there's a field trip and there's a bunch of teenagers who have come to see this exhibit and they're standing in front of your, you know, installation here. What do you hope that they take away from having seen their story presented in a museum like this?
I hope that they take away, and you know, particularly, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get this disclaimer in a way, because even though this is a story of my life, I want other people, particularly like young kids who come here, particularly, you know, like even, you know, young Black and brown kids who come here to, in a way, see themselves and understand that even though it's my story in a way, that I wanted it to be relatable to other people's lives as well. And I wanted it to just transcend like my own experience. And I knew in a way that it would.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's February, so it's Black History Month. And of course, we believe in celebrating Black history all year long because Black history is American history. But
Absolutely.
as we're here in the month, I think it's a good point to point out to people that like, this is history, your life is history, you're fitting into a bigger picture of your family story, but also your own experience is part of history. Like history isn't just, like wars and presidents and something that happened 200 years ago. It's, the lives that we're living every day are part of the fabric of history. And so, like you, I hope when school kids come to see this, they see themselves and understand the value of their own story and experience.
And understanding that there's nothing wrong with it. Like there are issues that you will face, but there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, we're so grateful because you really opened yourself up and you talk about yourself as a young Black urban queer child who is trying to find his place in the world, and there are many others like you, and all of us, and we want our stories represented here. And so thank you for sharing it and putting yourself out there so people can see themselves in your story.
I feel like I admit like I was a little nervous at first, but then once we got into it, and I realized that one of my biggest concerns was that people would think it would be something that would fall flat, and that it was about just me. But I wanted people to understand that even though it's my story, it's not just me. It's not just for me. And it's something that I'm hoping that people find relatable. That they will.
Can we open it up? So we take questions. If there's any questions or comments from the audience, we would love to hear and try to answer.
Yes, one of the questions from Shatria is, I wonder, since we're part of a religious and musical family, did you have any family members who were famous?
Yes. Yes. A few. Should I name?
Yeah, name names.
Okay. Like she's from my mom's side of the family. And I'm sure most of you out there, who are like at least like probably my age or like a little bit older, I'm sure you've heard of an R&B singer named Tweet. So Tweet is a cousin of mine on my mom's side. Her grandmother is a woman by the name of Effie Doris Sears Allen, and she is my great aunt. So Tweet and I are second cousins, so our moms are first cousins. I don't usually mention that because nobody would usually believe it anyway, but I'm glad that you asked that, Shatria. I never usually talk about it.
And who is someone who's like family, not blood relative, but kind of like the godmother?
Okay, well, before my dad became highly involved in the church and like playing drums in the church, for 24 years he played drums for blues singer Coco Taylor. She was also his godmother. So before he graduated high school, his mother would allow him to do gigs with her on the weekend only. And then eventually after he graduated school, he traveled with her full time for 24 years. So till 1986. That was, when he became more involved in the church.
Another question related to your family, how has your family received this exhibit, since it's such a personal story for you?
Oh, my mom was really excited. There were like a few questions like, why is that happening? But I think for the most part, it's been pretty well received by quite a few relatives, and especially my mom. Like, she's been really excited.
And what is it that you do now, June?
Currently, I do like some historical research when I can, and like some writing, some journalism when I do get a chance to, like, freelance a little bit. So yeah, that's currently where I'm at right now.
So what was the most difficult part of putting this exhibit together, and how did you overcome those obstacles?
Oh, wow, I think it was because I've not always been an extremely vulnerable. I mean, like, vulnerability has always been like an issue for me. So I think that that was one of the biggest issues, was just like putting like myself out there in a way and opening up a part of my life that I usually don't like tend to talk about. Like, my childhood, nobody asks. Like, I don't really ever talk about it. But it was a chance for me to do so, and for me to do it in a way that would be relatable to like other people around me, particularly like other, young people who are like is it Generation Z now? Z.
Yeah.
So I guess, the next generation, so Gen Z, would see that, there are people in my generation who went through likely similar things that they're going through now. So, or even people who are, my age or older, would find it relatable in their own way.
What memory or item brought you the most comfort in the room? Is there something there?
I think it would probably have to be the giraffe that sits right here in the corner. It's not the original. I still have the original at home. But it is a giraffe that I named at like 3. Giraffe, isn't that poetic? It's so poetic. And it was a stuffed giraffe that my parents got me when they went on like a very special trip that kids could not go on. And I didn't quite understand what that was about. But I was like crying because I wanted to go with them. So my dad bought that toy for me. I guess to get me to calm down, but it's, I still keep it at home because it reminds me of both my parents, but particularly my dad, who's no longer with us. And it's a toy I've had for like 25 years now.
Right. So, let's see, how did you come up with this idea? Someone asked.
I think we knew that we wanted to. I think if we had our druthers, we would kind of update all of that home in the Heartland, and for financial and logistical challenges, it's not an option for us on the table, but we also realized that a change needed to be made. And so a logical starting point was like, let's pick a space and modernize it. And so this physical location is nice because it's got these walls where we can put the labels and kind of expound on the story. And it does have the TV monitor, and it's not running right now, but we have footage that we recorded of June talking about the objects in this room and this experience here. So it gave us that kind of multimedia capability here.
And it was something that we had talked about like pretty frequently, like those changes. So it was really nice that we got to start here in a way of like kind of like I guess like decolonizing with the exhibit and updating it, because it's kind of antiquated at this point. So I'm glad that I got to be a part of, the start of an update.
For sure, you have ushered us into the 21st century with your story. So, thank you.
No, thank you.
James asks, what nuances has being from a Creole and Gullah heritage added to your experiences, additional to those of being Black generally?
That's a great question. Those particular parts of my life were kind of only talked about like in my house. And I guess because I was raised in Chicago and because people in my family didn't always look the way that people expected Creole people to look, it was kind of like an identity, a part of my identity that I kind of kept to myself because like, I wasn't ambiguous. Like certain relatives in my family who were lighter skinned and identified as Creole. And then, I also had to like recognize like my own privilege in a way because I had siblings who were much darker than I am, who were even, I guess like even more greatly like denied that identity. So yeah, and then even with being like of Gullah ancestry, going to school in South Carolina, it was also something I found that tended to be denied to me. Like hearing things like, well, you weren't born in South Carolina, so you can't be this. So, but I will say that it is something that I'm extremely proud of. And I've also like had to like remind people like in the past as far as like Creole identity, a lot of people who are more ambiguous or white passing and identify as Creole tend to make it a racial thing when it is not. Like granted, there are like Creole people who do have that's like mixed race ancestry that's not it's surpasses that. Like it's more of a cultural thing than just like a racial identity. I think at one point in time they wanted to try and like get a C put on like this some kind of like document in like Louisiana to like make it like a racial designation. But yeah, I mean, I hope that if that answered the question in a way.
So 2 questions here from Shanna. One is, did you draw the image in front of the chest?
I did.
Okay.
I drew that when I was about 19 when I drew that. And it was actually it's a picture of like somebody I was actually dating at the time. So yeah.
I wonder if he's out there and we'll like see it sometime and be like, oh my gosh.
Probably. If you're out there, that's you. So yeah, he asked me to draw it and I drew it, to the best of my ability. Because cameras on phones were like trash back then. But I took a picture of it and sent it to him. So.
And what song reflects this room or this past you?
Wow, that's a really good question. There are so many. There's so
You
many.
need a June playlist.
Wow. Goodness. Okay. One song would definitely have to be like "One Two Step" by Sierra. Y'all know who Sierra is. I know you do. Another song would probably have to be a gospel song that came out when I was like in elementary school, like maybe 12, 13-ish. It's from the Chicago Mass Choir, and it's what's that? I think it was Work It Out. Because everybody was playing that song that year. Like you wouldn't even expect it. Like people were just like bumping it in their cars with hydraulics going down the street. It was just like the song of the year. So those would be like 2 songs that definitely resonate and represent like who I was like at that time. Or I think about, I hear those songs, they take me back to like those years. So.
Did your childhood or youth experiences lead to your current career?
Yes. I was a fairly multifaceted kid. Like I had an interest in history, science, music, dance, but I think nothing really stuck to me more than like music and history did. Like I grew up in this family that I was like always so fascinated by, you know, the way people spoke, the way people looked. I wanted to know why. And I was always really inquisitive and like coach's kid, so I wanted to know things. And I was always really analytical, and I'm still really analytical, so I analyze everything. And I wanted to know everything. So I think that it definitely led to my adulthood career path.
Those are all the questions we have. Is there anything else you two want to say before we sign off?
I just want to give our heartfelt thanks to June because we as a museum are so proud of this installation and so grateful that your story is being shared here. So yeah, just thank you so much, June. You're amazing.
So thank you. I'm happy that I could be a part of this, that I could have like part of my story, or part of this particular exhibit. And I hope that you all out there find it in, you know, one or more ways like relatable to your own lives, so that even your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whomever finds it relatable to their own. Please come out and see it.
Great. Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you to Erika, and thank you so much to June. I'll echo Erika's thanks for sharing your story, and to your family for being willing to share their story as well. So thank you both for coming out tonight, and thank you so much for having this conversation with us. So everyone have a great and safe night.